thank you again for the opportunity to talk about sustainable fisheries. And we did do this presentation yesterday to some of the Spanish-speaking participants in this program. So I have a little bit of experience under my belt as of yesterday. And I wanted to mention there were a couple questions about aquaculture, which is something I can also speak to in kind of general broad terms, but this is really about wild capture fisheries. So with that, we'll get started. So our agenda today is to talk about 3 pillars of sustainability: environmental protection, social development, and economic growth. So we're going to talk about, again, the 3 pillars of sustainability. We'll talk about some threats and some challenges to fisheries sustainability, tools to address these challenges, and some case studies that might have applicability in your life. So the 3 pillars of sustainability are environmental protection, economic growth, and social development. And we're going to go through each of these as they come. So when looking at environmental sustainability, there are 3 areas that are important to understand. We should look at sustainable fish stocks and are there enough fish left in the ocean, minimizing environmental impact and what are the impacts of fishing, and effective fisheries management. So are operations well managed? So to that end, we should definitely look at stock status. So are there enough fish in the ocean? So governments manage this, and different plans are made to manage stocks depending on the answer. So the government will set quotas based on scientific data that they collect. And sometimes fishermen even collect this data in collaboration with the government agencies. And they also place restrictions on fishing in order to maintain stocks and adequately manage the fishery. These restrictions that they place can be around gear, the timing of the fishery in terms of openings, closings, and the duration of the fishery. And so I'm very sure and confident that many of you on this call know very well about fisheries management and the restrictions that they place on your fishery and your activities. So some of the threats to the stock status and environmental sustainability of fisheries are overfishing and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which can also be the acronym for illegal, unreported, and unregulated is IUU. So I'll use that as the term, and I'll kind of go through what they are. So overfishing is caused by subsidies and illegal fishing and poor fisheries management, leading to degraded ecosystems and decreasing food and economic security. As I said, IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, is one of the biggest threats to fish stocks and livelihoods that we have. This IUU fishing is a broad term that captures a wide variety of illegal fishing activity, and it's found in all types and dimensions of fisheries. It occurs both on the high seas and in areas within national jurisdictions. It happens onshore. And it concerns all aspects and stages of the capture and utilization of fish, and it may sometimes be associated with organized crime. So let's break down the term IUU really quickly. So illegal fishing is conducted by national or foreign vessels in waters without the permission of that state or against its laws and regulations. Unreported fishing is fishing that has not been reported or misreported to the relevant national authority against national laws and regulations. And a good example of misreporting is, for instance, I catch a really high value species of fish, and then I report it as something a lot lower of value, and that's misreporting. And that can also that misreporting is bad because it's basically you're not reporting what you actually caught, and so that makes the data erroneous. Then there's the last U is unregulated fishing, and this is an area under regional fisheries management that are conducted by vessels without nationality or by those flying flags of state or flags of convenience and that are not party to the organization that sets the regional management, or by a fishing entity in a manner that is not consistent with or goes against the conservation and management measures of that organization. Okay, so another environmental threat is bycatch. So bycatch is the capture of non-target species, and it could include animals such as dolphins and whales and marine turtles, and seabirds, but it also does include other fish, so non-target species. So if you're going out to catch, your target species is salmon, and you catch a lot of tuna at the same time, which is not your target, that tuna is considered bycatch. And according to some estimates, global bycatch may amount to 40% of the world's catch, and totals about 63 billion pounds per year. And so that's a significant problem, not only when we're talking about the economic value of bycatch, but also when we're talking about the environmental issues associated with catching birds and turtles and porpoise and whales, etc. So those are also of value. Next, we have climate change. Of course, we probably are all acutely aware of that, right? So some challenges associated with climate change in fisheries. Warmer waters are causing changes in fish migration patterns. So when you used to catch some fish, the water might have changed so much that now they're not even coming into the area where you used to find them in big abundance. Rising ocean temperatures and ocean acidification are radically altering marine aquatic ecosystems, while freshwater ecosystems are also being impacted by changes in water temperature and water flow and fish habitat loss. So a good example of this is oysters and oyster aquaculture. Oysters are really, really sensitive to ocean acidification. And so many oyster farmers are finding difficulty in keeping their oysters, actually in being able to grow their oysters, because of the changing levels of I guess it's pH and I can't remember the other one, but you know what I mean. The acidification of the water is significantly altering these ecosystems. The effect of sea level rise means that coastal fishing communities are significantly impacted by climate change. So we know that, you know, coastal communities live on the water's rising, and so are these communities are in danger of being completely flooded, essentially. And then finally, species that are overfished are more susceptible to the effects of climate change. Overfished populations have less size, so they're smaller, and they have less genetic diversity, and they're younger, so their age, than other populations of fish. So this makes them more susceptible to environmental related stress, including that stress related to climate change. Okay, fisheries management. We touched on this just a little bit, but I wanted to kind of stress the importance of fisheries management and good fisheries management. And I think fisheries management, it can be a controversial topic amongst fishermen, because I think sometimes they don't feel listened to or heard. And so I definitely understand the challenges about fisheries management, but it is absolutely essential. So the goal, of course, is to manage a stock or a population of fish appropriately. More importantly, stakeholders have different roles and responsibilities in fisheries management. So as we know, scientists explain the interaction between the fishery and the stock and the likely consequences of various management decisions or alternatives. Fishers need to report data in a timely and accurate manner, and data managers need to design data collection instruments that are effective and easy to comply with. So ease of compliance is definitely a consideration, especially when you're a fisherman and you're trying to do your job. If a fishery manager asks you to do something that is completely complex and difficult and not helpful, then it's a challenge, right? So enforcement agencies need to talk with managers to ensure that the management plans are capable of being enforced, and enforcement has to be applied uniformly, fairly, and consistently across all managed parties. All right, let's keep moving. So this is where we get into a little bit about the tools that are available to address some challenges that we see in environmental sustainability. And so there's a variety of a couple tools that I'm going to talk about. So two of them are certifications and ratings. And I have to apologize because I'm not completely sure of the level of knowledge around certifications and ratings that you have. So I'm going to speak a little high level, and we can certainly in the questions get into those more deeply if you want. So certifications are these are some examples of certifications and their logos. And so certification is a fishery or a fish farm, in this case right here, these two cases, a fishery will be assessed according to a standard. And these are the standard holders. And so if you pass this assessment, then you have the ability to put this logo on your package and make the claim, whatever the claim is. If it's a fair trade claim or MSC claim, which is kind of the a robust environmental sustainability assessment and certification. So these are voluntary. So as a fisher, I approach these organizations and say, I want to be certified and be able to put your logo on my pack. And then they work with you to help make that happen. Ratings, on the other hand, are these. And so Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch, you might be familiar with their guidance. It's what's called a stoplight system, where it's a green is the best option, yellow is a good alternative, and red is avoid. So that's how they, and it's also a standard that's rated, as well as this Oceanwise, which is a Canadian standard rating, which is also based pretty much on the Seafood Watch program. But these are involuntary. That means that the fisherman has no role in this, and they will come in and rate a fishery. They rate a stock, and then they say, okay, this stock is yellow, green, yellow, red, and then consumers, usually in the case, especially in Seafood Watch, can go online and see how that fish has been rated and make an appropriate decision about their purchase. So another thing that's important to note is that in terms of the North American seafood market and the buyers, the seafood buyers, the majority of them have made commitments, public commitments, to buy only certified or rated product. So, but at the same time, we fully understand that many small scale fisheries and fishers do not have the time, the money, or the need really to get a certification, because this is really, or a rating, right? This is involuntary anyway. But the certifications are really a market tool. So usually the market, your market, or the market that you want to sell your product to, will ask for that. So they might say, I will definitely buy your product and sell it at my retail store, but you need to have this, that, or the other certification. But we, again, as I said, we understand that not everybody can do that and has the financing to do that. So there are other tools to address environmental sustainability as well. And again, these are about market access. And this on the right here, what I'll talk about is also really about market access as well, and a commitment that buyers make to this. And so what is this? This is what's called a FIP, a Fishery Improvement Project, or a FIP. And also, I apologize, I don't know the level of understanding about a FIP, but I'll speak at a higher level about it, and we can definitely go into some more details. So a FIP stands for Fishery Improvement Project. And a fishery improvement project is a multi-stakeholder effort to address environmental or social challenges in a fishery. Excuse me, and suppliers, retailers, and food service companies can support the efforts of their source fisheries by participating in or buying products from a FIP. So FIPs are not labels, and I'll get to how we know if a fishery is in a FIP in a second. But there are specific requirements to say that your fishery is in a FIP. You can't just say it. You have to do some things, of course. So first of all, you must have an assessment of the fishery, of the environmental performance of the fishery. You must have a work plan that will show how you will address any gaps or problems or challenges that came out of the assessment that was done. You must ultimately show progress, that you are addressing those issues that were that came up in the assessment and in the work plan. You must show progress, that you're actually addressing those and they're getting better. It must be funded. You must show that you have funding. And finally, all information about the project should be publicly available. So I'm gonna take a drink of my coffee really quick. Thank you. I was starting to get a little tickle in my throat. I wanted to show you, I'm going to stop sharing my screen really quick and I'm going to move to another screen. So bear with me. And I'm going to show you a tool to do what I just said about FIPs. Let's see. I'm actually going to show screen share. Okay, so can you see me? Okay, Pamela, just maybe chime in. I'm sure you can see me. It's fine. So this is a site called fisheryprogress.org. And this is when I mentioned that a FIP should be publicly available. This is usually, well, this isn't the only tool, but it is a tool. It's the leading tool to where you can show your FIPs and report publicly about the progress of your FIPs. So I think Pamela is sharing this presentation afterwards. And so the links to these, everything that I mentioned has a link in the presentation. So you, and Pamela asked me to share this with you because it is actually a really neat tool and you can dig deep and find out what's happening around the world in terms of fishery improvement. So this is a map, clearly, and then you dive deep, and we can dive deep here if I can do it. Yep, there we go. So we're diving deeper. We're going to look at some look at a FIP, and I'm going to show these in a little more depth towards the end when I talk about a few case studies. So let's just look at this one. So this is a U.S. Gulf of Mexico northern pink shrimp, and so we dive deep into here and get all this information that is again publicly available. These are tabs about the progress of the improvements and the actions and the red indicator, which I'll talk about in a second. But you need to sign up to be able to dig deep into these tabs. It's a free site, but you can definitely go in, sign up, and then you can dig deeper into these tabs about what's happening. But again, this is just basic description about the fishery, what are the objectives, the type. There's two different types of FIPs, one's basic and one's comprehensive. What stage is it at now, etc. And then here's this kind of progress rating, excuse me, and then there's some additional information here. There's information about the participants, who's participating in it. Is it a buyer-led FIP, meaning a seafood buyer is supporting it and providing funding, or is it a fisher-led FIP? So there's lots of information. And then here we kind of get this snapshot about the starting evaluation. So this started in 2010. This FIP actually looks like it's stalling for some reason because it certainly hasn't addressed, it's addressing 0 of 28 indicators, but its progress is an A. So this is a question I might pose to the fishery progress people actually. So it looks like in any event, they have 3% in the red, 34% is actually, you know, moving forward yellow, but still needs some work. And 62% is really good. They've got green, they're doing really well. So I just wanted to share this as a resource because it is a pretty great thing. And I'll talk about this a little bit more when we do our, perfect, great. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about this, but FIPs are an interesting tool when you're not ready for you're not quite ready for certification, but you want to have market access because, like I mentioned before, that major seafood buyers in North America specifically have made public commitments to certifications and ratings, and they also make commitments to FIPs. But again, it has to have all those criteria in there until they, unless they, or otherwise they won't buy it from you. Another tool that I have here, right here on the left, are the voluntary guidelines for securing small-scale fisheries, and this is in a variety of languages. This is from the FAO, so you can, I have the link in there as well. You can go on the FAO website, and this is a pretty good, it's guidelines, of course, they're voluntary, but it's a good idea of what to expect when you're trying to improve your fishery and what you need to do. And it gives you guidelines, obviously, how to do that. Okay, so now I'm kind of moving towards social response. I'm sorry about like my here. Let's fix this a little bit. Now we've kind of talked about environmental sustainability and what that is, and now we are morphing towards social responsibility. And so what is it, and why did we start paying attention to it? So the sustainable seafood movement is approximately, well, it's a little more than 20 years old. And for those 20 years, the kind of seafood industry and the environmental, really the environmental NGOs and marine conservationists were really working on improving the environmental sustainability of fisheries and fish farms globally. And it turned out that we were ignoring a key component in fishery systems, which are people, right? Because people are actually dependent on fish, and they're the ones that are fishing, and they're the ones that are making decisions every day about how to interact with these fisheries. So we really, needed to start thinking about people as well. And this really became apparent in 2014, I think, 2014, 2015, so relatively recently, when a series of articles, newspaper articles came out in the Guardian newspaper and the AP around forced labor and child labor in shrimp supply chains from Thailand, specifically Southeast Asia. So it turns out that, it turns out that some fisheries in the world might be amazing and might be certified and doing great things around their environmental sustainability, but they have slave labor and forced labor in their processing facilities or on their vessels, peeling the shrimp, children, or or unfair, unsafe, horrible, in the worst cases, labor practices. So we really wanted to, all of us realized collectively that we need to talk about social responsibility. And so, but really it goes beyond, like it says here, protecting human and labor rights, but to address social economic well-being of all people in the supply chain, from the boat all the way, basically to the retail market, and making sure that people are accounted for and recognized and taken care of and are working in safe environments and not being exploited. So this is just a graphic about how social responsibility, what is it? It's like how slave, I can't even read it, how slave labor could be potentially in a seafood supply chain. So it's a pretty good graphic. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some of those challenges, some challenges around social responsibility. So there are 3 pillars. That's better. That's what I was looking for. Okay, there are 3 pillars in social responsibility as well. And so one of those, the first one is to protect human rights and dignity and access to resources. So basic human rights and dignity should be respected, labor rights should be protected, and adequate living and working conditions should be provided. Rights to resources, including tenure and access rights, are secured. The second pillar of kind of social responsibility is ensuring equality and equitable opportunity to benefit. So equal opportunities to benefit are ensured for all workers. Recognition, voice, and respectful engagement for all groups, irrespective of gender, ethnicity, culture, and socioeconomic status, should also be ensured. The third one is improving food and livelihood security. So this is the one that's probably the least paid attention to, actually. And food security, as we know, especially in this time of COVID, when there's been so many disruptions to global seafood supply chains, and we've really understood how excuse me, we've really understood how vulnerable these long, giant supply chains are to global disruptions. We should really, in my opinion, start to think more about how to improve food security, really, and of course, livelihood security. So nutritional sustenance needs of resource-dependent communities are maintained and improved, and livelihood opportunities are secured or improved, including fair access to markets and capabilities to maintain income generation. Okay, so here's what I am working on specifically. This is also a piece of social responsibility, but it actually is really gender equality and women's empowerment is really a cross-cutting theme across all of these things, because environmental sustainability also has a significant gender component, because women are the ones that are affected most by climate change. Women are the ones that are most affected by changes in fishing practices, usually. And in social responsibility, clearly women are also very much, the majority of women are found in um, in the processing sector, and we know that 50% of people in global seafood production are women. So women play a huge role in global seafood production, but they are generally discounted and ignored and invisible. And to kind of go back a little bit, gender equality means that the behavior, aspirations, and needs of women and men are equally considered. And as I mentioned, women's needs are seldom considered, and I'm talking globally. So it's something that is also, in my opinion, underlooked and under-examined and under-supported. So that is why I launched SAGE, Seafood and Gender Equality, last year, to address some of these issues in global seafood production and bring these women up into the light, and so we can understand the challenges that they face. So there are many challenges, of course, associated with gender equality in seafood production, which mainly revolve around different access to resources. Men and women have different access to resources, period. Access to credit and finance. Many women globally cannot access credit or finance. And sometimes in household decision-making around money is also something that tends to not fall in women's purview. Usually it's the head of the household is the man, and he makes decisions about finances. So that's also something to take into account. Access to education is a consideration, and training opportunities. Women can't benefit from training opportunities if there's low literacy in their community or in their country. So, we have to think about all these things and all these challenges when we're coming in to or when we're thinking about developing programs to support fisheries improvement. And then gender-based violence and sexual harassment also happens quite often in fisheries. So that's one slide on that, but I could be the whole topic of the day. Maybe that's another topic for another time. So, excuse me. So there are a lot of tools. So like I said, addressing social responsibility is relatively new in the seafood space. And other sectors like coffee, cocoa, they have a more advanced tools that because they've been doing this longer. Clearly, though, there's still issues everywhere. So there's not as many tools in the seafood space, but there are some of them. There's some seafood certifications that actually look at gender. Fair Trade USA, where I came from prior to SAGE, does have some gender criteria in there, and there's some other tools, excuse me, about social responsibility specifically. And the majority of the tools, I must say, focus on solving that the human rights issues, specifically slave labor, child labor, forced labor. That's the real focus so far on egregious human rights. But this doesn't, and I mentioned before that that the majority of North American seafood buyers and retailers have commitments to environmentally sustainable and socially responsible seafood. And so they are going to want to know from you, if you want to sell into their market, they're going to want to know the data. They're going to want to know, they're going to want to have verification that your fish wasn't caught by and processed by forced labor or children. They're going to want to know that the working conditions are and were safe. They're going to want to know that ethical recruiting practices were implemented. And that's in the case of migrant labor that's working in the supply chain, which often happens, right? Especially in, in fisheries, but also a lot in processing sector. They'll want to see that worker grievance mechanisms are in place so that workers can have a safe and effective way to voice their concerns. And those concerns are addressed. So they want to know that. They're going to want to engage with you and hear what you're doing on the ground. And they will communicate to you their expectations around social responsibility and what you should do to meet these expectations. There are some groups that are experimenting with hotlines. That's mostly, I think, in Southeast Asia. So there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of innovation happening right now. So So that's just something to be aware of, is those things that you're going to have to prove, maybe eventually, and there are tools in development or existing that can help you do that. So another kind of thing that is happening right now as well is around, there's environmental sustainability and social responsibility, and then economic viability. And there's a new kind of wave happening where you should really have all three of these things in your supply chain, because and it's kind of almost called a FIP plus approach, where it's kind of a broader set of integrated and complementary interventions that recognize the complex social and economic landscape inherent, well, specifically in small scale fisheries. And it's about making sure that the fisher and others in the supply chain are getting their fair share of what they should be making, as well as not experiencing the entire burden, financial burden of making these improvements. Because these improvements that, for instance, you're asked to do in a FIP can be very expensive. And what we don't want is to have the fishermen bear the burden of not only implementing these improvements, but also having to pay for it. So this making sure that the fishery is economically viable is a burgeoning. I mean, it's already being, really, really researched and kind of implemented now, but it's definitely something that's newer. And then I'll say, I have a next slide that is a case study. So as an example, there's an example of an economic viability tool that this group did a case study. I mentioned FIP plus, but they also call it sometimes triple impact fishery improvement framework. And this is, again, a case study. There's I think I included the link in here as well. They, and really what this is about maximizing value for the fishermen in the supply chain. So, and that's done through making sure that the quality is assured. And so an example of that is helping, is kind of training. Here is the second point here, training in achieving the food safety certification. And yesterday someone had a question about HACCP. So that's the HACCP, I think it's the acronym. So that was what we were talking about yesterday, Pamela. So, and then there's also like access to ice. That is something that in small scale fisheries can be a challenge. So how can we, make sure, how can we assure that ice is available so that people can put their fish immediately on ice, and that guarantees better quality, right? So there's also kind of thinking about maximum utilization of a fish. So if you have a client that, for instance, you're selling salmon, I use salmon a lot as an example because that's where my expertise lies. So if you have a salmon and you have a client that only wants salmon fillets, what are you going to do with the head and the tail and the bones, the rack? What will you do with that stuff? And there are markets for those. So how can we kind of explore and find additional markets to take on the other parts of fish that your main buyer might not want? And so that's a lot of that kind of that push towards economic viability, which I think is really important. So another really key consideration in fisheries and in certifications and ratings and improvements and being able to prove what you say is fish that you caught ultimately is around traceability and transparency. And again, North American seafood buyers and European buyers will all require some sort of traceability system to make sure that they can prove, or that to make sure that it's the catch is verified and it's verifiable, and this revolves around legality of the catch. And I mentioned the IUU fishing. That's a way to combat IUU, is to have a robust traceability system. And traceability is a record-keeping system designed to track the flow of product through the production process, and it should be and supply chain. So this is super important. I'm going to talk about some traceability tools that are out there on in the world. One of the we've already talked about certifications and standards. There is now a new standard around traceability, and it's called the organization that put it out is called the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, or GDSD for short. And so they've established kind of a standardized what's called KDEs, which stands for key data elements. There we go. I'm going to talk about those in a second. So they've established through multi-stakeholder process exactly like what should fishermen and then the supply chain be tracking in terms of traceability. And I'll talk about specifically what those are in a second. And one of the reasons I wanted to mention why traceability is so important is because, for instance, again, and I apologize, I'm in the United States, and I know this market fairly well. So this is the example that I tend to use more than everything. And I realize that seafood is a global industry, and there might be different requirements at different countries, but I'm speaking about what I know. And so the US has requirements around, it's called the SIMP, S-I-M-P, which stands for Seafood Import Monitoring Protocol. And that protocol establishes, it's a protocol for traceability around 13 key species, which tend to be the more quote unquote risky species. So they want to make risky meaning to slave labor or trafficking, human trafficking labor. So they want to make sure that those key data elements are collected around these 13 key species before they allow them to come into the US. And that's also in a link on the website if you're interested. So the key data elements are usually very simple, but these should follow the fish throughout the entire supply chain. And it's usually, what's the vessel name, or the name of the fisherman, where it was caught, when it was caught, who caught it, what kind of gear was used, how much it weighed, that kind of stuff. So these are and again, this is a link. You can definitely look at this later. It's the Global Dialogue for Seafood Traceability. And so people, depending on where you're selling to, might ask you to collect data. And another thing I should mention, which I will mention right now, because I'm going to talk about tools. I'll talk about these tools, and then I'll come back to what I was going to say. So there are a lot of different kind of tools on the market. Traceability tools, electronic ones, are really popular in terms of they have a lot of innovation. What are they called? Like contests and competitions to like who can create the best traceability tool. So a lot of innovation has happened on this front in the past probably 8 years, 10 years. There's, electronic traceability that can go from your phone, programs that the fishermen can download and scan, whatever. And then there's blockchain technology, which is a little bit more complicated, and I'm not expert, so I'm not going to even try to tell you what that is, but it is popular. It's becoming more popular. And then there's electronic traceability tools, like I mentioned, for instance, QR codes, where you just take your phone and you can put it onto a label on your package, and all the information about the fish and where it was caught will come up on your phone. And what I was going to say before is that, yes, there's a lot of electronic traceability tools out there at varying costs and varying price points, but we also recognize, and by we, I mean kind of the global seafood community, that in a lot of places around the world, they're still using paper-based methods to account for their catches and traceability, and traceability. So it's just, I think the effort is to try to turn those paper-based systems into more of a electronic system, be that through a cell phone or in some other way. So that's something to think about also. And I did mention several times about market commitments, and I basically the slide just says that. It says that again. And there is a link in here that does discuss about the evolution of market commitments, because these are fairly new within the last probably 10, 12 years, these market commitments are very new. And buyers, seafood buyers in North America, using their leverage to get fisheries into improvement initiatives by saying that I'm committing to this certification, and if the fishery wants to sell into my retail store, they have to do that. And so this is pretty new. So a few case studies which I thought might be interesting, and these are really FIPs, so fishery improvement projects, which we talked about a little. One is a Caribbean red snapper, and the other is Yucatan grouper. So I mentioned about the certification, I'm sorry, the fisheryprogress.org. And so this is, there's the link in there, and I can go back on there and show you, but just to give you an idea of the scope of what a fishery improvement project looks like. So for Brazil red snapper, the fishery improvement project, Netuno is the fishing company. And so they made a commitment to this fishery improvement project in the fishery from which where they fish. They gathered all the stakeholders together. So that includes people in the community, that includes academics, that includes government officials, everyone who has any kind of touchstone or touch point to the fishery is a stakeholder. They gathered them all together as much as they could. They started continuous data collection. Again, I mentioned that data is something that is super important, and many small scale fisheries don't collect data. And so data collection is usually one of the first things that has to be done, unless it's a very well documented fishery, which also happens, of course, and that makes it easier. They developed a management plan to implement. They implemented escape panels on traps. So this would be some sort of gear modification. So probably in the, So probably in their, when they started the data and they developed this management plan, this was based on an assessment that they did of the fishery. And then they saw that these traps could have excessive bycatch. So maybe, and I'm making this up, I don't know if this is true, but it's theory. So maybe these traps are catching a lot of turtles. And so in order to lower the bycatch and meet their management plan, they had to modify their traps to include some escape panels. So turtles can get out, but the fish can't get out. They developed a study on these snapper stocks. They developed a strategy to ensure the government adopts the best practices that the FIP is recommending. That's usually a super challenging part of a FIP, is getting the government to participate. Sometimes governments are very much active, and sometimes, as we know, it can be difficult to move a government into supporting you for anything, right? So that's a challenge a lot of times in these projects. They prepared a budget, and again, they made all the information publicly available. So this is really a FIP in a nutshell. Again, this is a snapshot from fisheryprogress.org about the Brazil red snapper FIP. Again, there's the link is in here later to view. So, again, it just tells you the description of the FIP, what they did. This is one thing that was missing from the one I showed you on the online version. This is the current status of what they've been working towards, kind of red, yellow, and green. But this is the beginning status. And so they were very much red. And so the amount of work that they've done, I can't see in the timeline there. Oh, it's from 2014. So that started in 2014. This is what they looked like. And then they've been continuously working, trying to get that red less and less. And they seem to have done a really good job. But like I said, you can sign up for fisheryprogress.org. It's free to sign up and dig deeper. And this red tab, this red indicator progress tab right here would be able to tell you exactly what happened within this improvement. It's pretty neat. I like that kind of stuff. And then finally, this Mexican Yucatan black and red grouper FIP. Again, publicly available information on fisheryprogress.org. You should, you can read these objectives. It's really helpful to understand why you're doing this. And you have to, be able to articulate that. Like, why do you want this to be improved? What's your purpose? What's your goal? And then again, this kind of status report, I think is really interesting. And then kind of timelines and gives you ideas of when to expect new updates. So in conclusion, we've made it. Sustainability is a journey, and there is no one solution. There is no one way, you know, there's best practices and there's guidelines and there's tools, but it's really not something that you can do all day tomorrow and by yourself. You really have to commit to being collaborative, and it's usually a long-term commitment. So and like I said, sustainability is a journey, and you're on this road. And clearly, if you're here, you're interested in talking and learning more about it. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you. Yay, we can all raise our hands and shout woo, woo, that we made it through this. I know that was a lot of information, and I really appreciate everyone's time, and I appreciate every fisherman's hard work, and I know how hard it is. And I really wish I could be there with you in person and eat some of your fresh fish. I really do. And someday I hope that will happen.